Hi, folks. This is your friendly neighborhood Mr. Thomas coming to you for DMPT 2600 and going through Project One, editing the basic dialogue scene. And the last time we spoke in part one, I basically explained to you how digital editing works. We talked about linking files, and we also talked about organizing our source clips in the project panel. Remember, every time I import a clip into Premiere, it will appear in the project panel. And I am in list view here, which is the best view for you. And the last thing I left off on was not being able, one of the final things that I left out on was not being able to label these bins. I've restarted my system and the problem is gone. Sometimes that's all it takes. So if you're ever running into a problem that the program isn't working right, you can't figure out how to fix it, it's a little glitch that's happening. First, if you can, save your project so you don't lose your work by going File, Save, or using the keyboard shortcut Command S. And then next, simply go in Premiere Pro, exit, or Premiere Pro quit. I'm sorry, quit Premiere Pro. Command Q is the keyboard shortcut for that, and then restart it. Many times that will fix the problem for you. Sometimes the best methods are the easiest. So that fixed the problem of not being able to label the bins. You can see I've labeled the bin masters with the shots 1, 2, 1, 4, and 1A2 in it. 1B is another bin, 1B1, 1B2, and 1B4, and I did C, D, and E as well. Bin number 7 down here is the F bin. So what I'm going to do to show you how I rename a bin is I just click one time on the bin to select it, and then click on the words bin 07 in this case. It'll highlight in light blue, and a naming field, a white naming field will open up around it. You just give it the correct name. In this case, it's 1F, because everything inside of the bin has a 1 and an F in it. All the source clips inside of the bin that is has a 1 and an F in the clip name, the source clip name. So I'm going to do the same thing for 1G and 1H and 1J. Don't double click really fast on the bin, because if you double click on the bin icon, it's going to open the bin, which is not what you want to do. By the way, I'm going to close this bin by going to the bin menu. This is a bin tab. Remember that these 3 horizontal lines are a menu. So I'm going to click the bin menu and go to close panel to close that bin out. I'm in the media browser now. That's not where I want to be. I want to be in the project tab. I want to be in the project window. So I'm going to click on that project panel. I'm back where I was initially. And so I'm going to click one time to highlight the bin 10 and then click on the name. Wait a second or two and then click on the name. Don't do a fast double click. Just click, wait a second, then click again. Same thing with bin 11. This is 1K series. Okay. And then this should be 1M series. M. And then this should be 1N series. N. And this should be 1P series. And this should be sequences. This is the sequence that's in the timeline, the sequence called just the master. Okay. This is the one I gave you. To be honest with you, you could start from scratch if you were having problems with the sequence, or you just wanted to start off from scratch without my notes. You can do that by simply we're going to show you how to create a new sequence in a second, but I'm going to call this bin sequences. By the way, you'll notice that I'm calling these icons right here bins and not folders. The reason for that is that in the film world, when we edit film, some people still edit on film, but it's a vanishing art. When we edit film, there are these big containers that kind of look like trash cans with a clothes hanger on them called film bins. And that's what editors would use to organize their work. I'm gonna see if I can find a picture of it a picture of a film bin. Here's a, let's see, right here. Okay. This is a picture of a film bin. Okay. So it's like a rolling rack that has a rail where you hang long lengths of film footage. Okay. And each length of film footage, we measure film length when we're editing on film. We measure it in feet and inches in frames, as opposed to using time code when we're actually editing real film. And this area at the bottom here, you can see this is like a cloth bag where the clips or the where the strips of film kind of fall into, but they're hanging from the rail. If there's any film footage that you don't want to use, you would normally remove it or clip it from the each shot that's hung. So like 1J, 1N, 1M would be hung in separate film strip shots. We clip it and then let it fall into the bag there if we don't want to use it. So this is called a film bin, and it's a way of organizing your footage. And that is where we get the parlance of using the word film bin here. It's kind of like a, it's a homage to how people still do and used to edit using film bins, organize using film bins. And whenever we're talking about these folder looking icons inside of Premiere, we're always going to use the term bin, not folder. Okay. If we're outside of Premiere, you can use the word folder, like on the desktop or anywhere else on the computer, you can use the word folder. But inside of Premiere, we're going to say bin. Something else I don't think I could do is we're in list view. And we have the icons for a movie or the icon for a picture, okay, or video as they call it, icon for video. We have the icon for a sequence here. I wanted to show you an icon for audio, so I'm going to double click at the bottom of the project panel to find a clip that is just audio. I double click the import clips window opens up, and in this search field here, I'm going to type in MP3. Okay, MP3 is a type of audio file, and I really don't care which type of file we get. It doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and just use Going Home. Well, no, that's like a voiceover. Let's use I'm going to go back and do this again because I messed it up. Okay, let's use the Jaws theme. Okay, this is an audio file. I'm going to an MP3 audio file. It's a type of audio file. It's not a very high quality audio file, believe it or not. MP3s are very lossy, meaning that they don't have a lot of quality. Anytime you're bringing in audio into Premiere to edit on a project, you generally want to use an AIFF file, which is an audio interchange file format. Okay, that's what AIFF stands for, and that's one type of audio file. And there's another type of audio file called a WAV, W-A-V, WAV file. Most of the time, you'll see you'll see both of them. You'll see both of them, but a lot of the time when you're dealing with editing audio, you'll see AIFFs a lot of the time. You'll see waves occasionally as well. Let's double click on this audio file, and you can hear it's the Jaws theme. If you've ever seen the movie, you see you have the playhead here. We have the waveform. I have two waveforms because this is a stereo audio file. That means that there is a left speaker with audio coming through it and a right speaker with audio coming through it, okay? Now a mono file, if this is a mono file, I may still hear it in both channels, left and right, in both speakers, but if it's a mono file, it would just be one waveform. So you say, well, what's the difference between a stereo file and a mono file if you hear them both through both speakers? Well, the difference is, here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. Okay, enough of that. The difference is that in this particular case, in a stereo file, I know I'm playing it in both channels, the left channel and the right channel, which is the equivalent of the left speaker and the right speaker. But with the stereo file, my left channel could be playing something entirely different from my right channel. So, for example, I could have the Jaws music on the left channel, but the right channel could be some voiceover narration. Okay, it's all in the same stereo audio file. It's one file, but it has two channels. Okay, it's almost like two lanes on a highway. Okay, I can have two different forms of traffic in that on two different lanes. Okay, I've got my left channel and my right channel. My left channel and my right channel, and they could be different. It could have different audio information. So that's what a stereo file is. Whereas an audio is, yes, it's just one waveform, and I could hear it through both speakers, though, in most cases. Okay, but it's just one set of information, one set of audio information. What you hear in the left speaker is always what you hear in the right speaker, and there are no two ways about that. By the way, this doesn't really have much to do with this project, but while we're here, many times people just deal with monofiles in when you're editing video. Like, for example, I can see that these are monofiles that are included with the Hope video. The audio that's connected with the video is mono, and I can tell that because I only have one waveform. Okay, I can even open it up in the source monitor. You say, well, that's picture, that's not audio. How do I see the waveform? I'm going to go to the settings menu, which looks like a wrench, and then go to audio waveform. It'll just show me the waveform that's associated with the picture, or the waveform that's associated with the video. So this is the waveform. You see, that's a mono audio file. Okay, it's just one channel, one waveform, one channel. But though that one channel plays through both the left and the right speakers. And to show you that, you can look at, I play it, and I can look over here on my VU meter to the right of the timeline, and I can see I have two green vertical lines bumping. That's another audio file there. Okay, on shot 1E1. Okay, but you see it's the same thing. Okay, you can see that I have two bars, one in the left and one in the right. Okay, that means the left speaker and the right speaker in my VU meter. By the way, to get back to seeing the picture and hearing the audio in the source monitor, click the settings menu and go to composite video. Composite means that it's all of the video combined, okay, picture and audio. So I'm not seeing just the audio waveform, I'm seeing the picture as well. I'm gonna do the same thing with the first shot that I did it to. Okay, great. All right, so that's all we're gonna talk about as far as audio right now. So let's get rid of our Jaws theme. I give you a master shot right here. The master shot 1-2 is the one I use. And as I mentioned before, each one of these markers is kind of like a little note that I leave to myself or leave to the students who want to read it, as far as what I would do at this point in the video from the perspective of the master, what type of editing decision I would make and why. And I have a color code here where, like, the red markers, this is a red marker, those are usually the mistakes with the footage, something I need to pay attention to. If I want to get if I hover over the marker, I can see the note, but if I really want to see it closely, I can double click on it, and a marker window opens here. And this was a red marker. I can see that because I have the little marker highlighted here, and it's basically a note that I wrote. And what it says is that at this frame, at frame 1 hour, 0 minutes, 50 seconds, and 23 frames, I can see a bounce card. That means a white board that they put on the set to bounce more light from a light fixture down to the back of Roth's head. Okay, it's in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and I left that red marker to know, as an editor, hey, that's a mistake they made when they shot it. You might want to cut away from this shot if you're using this master before this point in time. Okay, so these are just like little helpful notes. I'll grab another one. Okay, this one right here at 1 hour, 1 minute, 14 seconds, and 10 frames. Cut to waitress. It says right about here in the master, if you're still on the master, that will be a good time where you want to cut to 1J1, the medium shot of the waitress as she abruptly enters the scene. Okay. Um, uh, and it kind of gives you a little bit of theory, but also tells you what you might want to do. Now, you don't necessarily have to do everything that's in all of these comment markers. These are just illustrations of the rationale why I made the decisions I made when I was editing. And if you could at least look at these, even if you decide to do something different, if you can kind of learn the fact that you should have a rationale and be able to articulate or say why you cut to a particular shot. You don't just cut to a shot because I felt like it, or cut to a shot because it's pretty, or it looks good, or it makes sense. You have to be able to articulate and justify each shot. It's like playing chess. You don't just arbitrarily move the pawn, or arbitrarily move the queen, or arbitrarily move a rook or knight. You have a very strategic and specific reason for doing these things. And that's one thing that we really want to emphasize, is that there's a stereotype about art that it's just what you feel, and it's all subjective. Art's in the eye of the beholder, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and all that kind of artsy jazz. Well, that's a bunch of garbage. Yes, people have preferences for art, but as far as what art is, it is a form of communication. Communication is intentional, just like the words that I'm saying to you. Okay, if I was singing a song, most people can agree that would be a form of art. There's specific words I would use if I'm singing lyrics, okay? Chord progressions that I would use that your ear would pick up on, and it would make sense to you. You would understand what I was saying because I'm communicating. Editing is no different, okay? So, yes, there are rules as far as how you communicate to the audience in a way that they can understand what a close-up means, what a wide shot means. But at the same time, there's so much latitude, or you have so many options within that set of constraints. I've heard people say constraints are freeing. Constraints are freeing, because if somebody says you could do anything, anytime, anywhere, anyhow you want to do it, most people's minds would just totally lock up because there's so many options, they don't know how to choose. Now, if they tell you, hey, you have a certain set of constraints, a certain set of rules, but within these rules, here are your options. Now you've given something someone can work with, and they can play within that little sandbox of options that you've given them. And that's where art comes in. You can create the expression within those rules, or within those constraints. Okay. But let's just say you wanted to start off from scratch. You didn't want to start off with the master that I laid down here. Here's the master that I laid down for you, complete with the markers. The same markers that were in the source monitor, they appear in the timeline when I edit a clip to the timeline. But say you wanted to start off from scratch. One easy way to make a new timeline or a new sequence that matches the footage that you shot, that has the same frame size and frame rate and sample rate for audio, okay, is simply dragging a sample of the file, like a sample of the video, so a source clip, that's an example of what you're going to be editing, and dragging and dropping it over here onto the new item button. That's the page right next to the trash can icon. It looks like a dog-eared button icon. If I drag a sample of the footage onto the new item button, bottom right-hand corner of the project panel, what's going to happen is it's going to create a new sequence for me, or a new timeline for me. The timeline will be named after the clip that I dropped on the new item button. So you can see the timeline is named 1-4, or the sequence is named 1-4. And it'll also place that first clip into the timeline as the very first thing we see at time 0000. Okay. You may not want this to be the first shot, so that's fine. Just select it and press the delete key in the timeline. You may not want 1-4 to be the title of the new sequence, and I would highly suggest that it's not. So you can, if you go to your timeline, if you go to your project panel, you'll see that here is that sequence. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the sequence down to the sequences folder, because I always want to stay organized. And then I'm going to retitle this. Instead of calling it 1-4, I'll call it, I don't know, give it a name that means something to you, like final, okay? Or hope, or something like that. Hope rough cut, something that means something to you, all right? But as you can see, now it's called Hope rough cut in the timeline or the sequence window, and here it is, okay? So that's how you make a sequence. You could have gone the long way around to make a new sequence by going to the File, New, Sequence route, okay? Command N is a keyboard shortcut for that. And then I could have manually selected the sequence settings that I want for my new timeline, okay? Timeline settings, sequence settings, same thing. In this particular case, I can go into the DVNTSC folder and then choose widescreen 48 kilohertz. That's pretty much what we're dealing with here. So I'm going to select that, okay? And then, of course, if I had any more specific settings, like I wanted to change the time base, which is the frame rate, or I wanted to change the sample rate for the audio. Like, for example, if the audio was recorded only in 44.1, I can make those changes there. The new sequence settings tab allows you to make more specific tweaks. Of course, the tracks tab allows you to add or delete audio or video tracks to the timeline, and it also specifies your mastering audio format, in which case, when I'm done with all of this stuff, I want it to output a stereo audio file. That means one audio file. That's the entire edited sequence, the entire edited project, with a left speaker and a right speaker, okay? Because it's stereo, remember, the audio that's in the left speaker can be entirely different from what's coming out of the right speaker, but any changes that I would make like that would be done. It's, I would do that in the timeline. In this case, we're not going to do that. 99% of the time, you won't do that. But that just lets you know the mastering format. Of course, I could do Dolby Surround 5.1, multi-channel, and mono as well, okay? So, if I were to click OK in that case, File, New, Sequence, I'll go ahead and do that. Let's choose the one I had, DVNTSC, 48 kilohertz, and we can call this Long Way Round. Okay, click OK. That's the same way. That's the same thing, right? That's basically the same thing as what I did by dragging a sample of the footage to the new item button, okay? It just lets you, do it manually. There may be a time, the only time you really want to do that is if you're starting from scratch and you don't have the sample footage in yet. Maybe if you're just starting blank and you haven't imported anything yet, or if you have some very specific, special customized settings you want to make to your sequence. That's another example of when you want to do that. Okay, so we're all set up, and what we're going to do, I'm going to delete these sequences because we really don't need those. I'm going to start with my just the master, okay? And essentially, what I'm going to do, this is what it originally looked like before I made some changes there. Save, you always want to save periodically. Okay, so I'm gonna drop down my master there. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and take the whole thing. All right, one of the first things you'll do when you start from scratch is drop down your master, your whole master. The idea is, this is like a skeleton of the entire scene. Of course, I'm not gonna spend the entire sequence or the entire time on this one shot, because that would be quite boring, right? Seeing everything from this wide master, okay? What I'd want to do is I want to cut to coverage, that is tighter shots as the sequence plays in, because there's certain parts of the story that are better told from other shots. For example, when Roth is speaking, Wouldn't it be great if you cut to a shot that's a close-up of Roth, for example? But beginning with the master shot is always a good idea, even if you end up replacing it all, which you normally will. Just to let you know, the master shot is the master shot is sometimes people choose to bookend the scene with masters, so they'll start the scene with the master and end the scene with the master. And that's great. One of the things you should be looking at in all the shots, including the master, is you need to watch for performance. Remember, the first and most important thing that an editor should be observing, you need to look for and train your eye to hone your eye for, is the actors' performances. Even a brief moment of less than optimum performance can destroy a scene's illusion of truth. It's your responsibility, to the director, to the actors, and to the project, to find the best performances for each line, each moment, and each beat of the scene and try to incorporate them. Inevitably, there will be trade-offs. For example, there might be a camera error that kind of messes up a great moment that we see on screen, or a car horn that might spoil an otherwise perfect shot. For example, in this shot, with this footage, there are several shots where you can hear a dog barking outside. Okay, that really messes up your audio. But that's the only shot you have, and it may be a decent shot as far as the image is concerned. Sometimes the compromises that you have to make as an editor will be more editorial, as they say. A change of screen direction, that means, is Roth on the left of the screen or is Roth on the right of the screen? We call that screen left or screen right. Or a bit of business that might not match from one shot to the next. Remember, business is when people handle things. Like, for example, if you handle a prop, like if Anne fidgets with her cup, that's business. Whereas blocking is when people move around from point A to point B on the set. Okay? So sometimes you may have to use a less than perfect take in which some action from say a first shot you use matches with another shot you're going to be cutting to a second shot that you're going to use. In another situation, a scene that could be too long because of they're saying too much, you might want to trim away some dialogue. With an editor, pretty much anything is game. That means that as long as you're following the directions of the director, you can do things like trim out unnecessary lines of dialogue. Don't think that you have to keep the pristine everything if it doesn't push the story forward, if it doesn't illuminate theme, character, or story. Those are the three levels: theme, character, and story that you are illuminating or depicting as an editor in a film. You could also, of course, say there's a long moment of silence between lines. Okay, you can pull out the air or the silence between these two people talking if you want. Don't worry, there are tricks that we can use to do things like speed up the scene, how fast it moves, by cutting the cutaways and inserts and stealing audio from an alternative take, trimming out a word or a whole line by going to the over-the-shoulder shot where I can't see the actor's lips, okay, and so on. In some ways, maintaining the performance quality is the single most important part of your job. Something that you definitely want to bear in mind with as an editor is a new shot means new information. Okay, so basically what that means is that you stick with a shot until you get something new to tell. For example, I'll give you an example. I'm going to play this shot, the master.
Action.
And I see Anne walk in and she stops and looks. Bam. Now, this is going to cause the audience to ask a question. What question is this going to cause the audience to ask is, well, who is she looking at, or what is she looking at? And the audience would expect you to cut to what Anne is looking at from Anne's point of view. This informs what your next cut should be. Okay, probably a shot of Roth. Okay, by the way, that's what this first marker says here. I jump to it by doing Shift M and I double click on it. This first marker says cut to Roth as part of a gaze object gaze or gaze object reaction syntax. Gaze object reaction syntax, that's basically saying that it's like a spell or like language where I have gaze, that's someone who's on screen doing the looking, G-A-Z-E. This is Anne looking screen left. And then I show in the next shot what Anne is looking at. That's my object shot, which doesn't have to be an object. It can be a person, of course. And then reaction shot is I cut back to Anne and I show what Anne does as a result of seeing what's in that previous object shot. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a shot of Roth. By the way, I'm going to go to, I'm going to get pictures in my icons here, or in my icons or my list view icons by going to the project panel menu and then going down to thumbnails. Bam. Now you see I have the best of both worlds. I still have my metadata, but I have icons here with pictures so I can tell much quicker and easier what's going on in each shot. I like 1G1. All right, I'm going to double click on 1G1. But unfortunately, hey, I can't use 1G1. Why? Because Anne is looking at Roth. This kind of shows you Anne's perspective, but Anne's in the shot. There's nobody sitting next to Roth yet, and it's definitely not Anne sitting next to Roth yet. So I can't use 1G1. And as you can see, that's how the shot begins. Let's try another one. Let's try 1F1. Same thing, okay? Let's try 1E2. Hey, 1E2 I might be able to use. By the way, you can use anything from when the frame, when the slate leaves the frame. You can use anything in the shot from right when the slate leaves the frame. You don't have to worry about the director saying action or cut or anything like that, because of the fact that all that audio we can edit out, no problem. So I want to use every little piece of this shot I can possibly use. So I'm going to start literally the frame after the slate leaves the image. And I'm going to press I on the keyboard to set an endpoint. And the question is, well, how long is Anne going to look at him? How long should I show this shot? It doesn't have to be that long. It depends on two things. Number one, you don't want it to be too fast, like 5 or 6 frames. That's too fast. You want it to be on the screen long enough for the audience to be able to scan the frame, scan the image with their eyes and say, okay, I see it's a guy sitting there in a booth. You want them to be able to, you want the shot to be on the image, you want the image to be on the screen long enough so they can visually digest what's going on. But you don't want it to be on there too long because, okay, after a second, after 2 seconds, I get the point. It's a guy in a booth. There's no new visual information. It's just a guy in a booth. So I want to cut away from it as soon as you start to get used to the shot or you got it, okay? Part of being an editor is being able to sense how long you need to hold on to a shot, okay? So I'm going to set an endpoint there, roughly between 15 frames and 1 second and 15 frames. If you're shooting with a frame rate of 30 frames per second, is pretty good for what we would call, this case is like a kind of like a cutaway. I'm cutting away from Anne over here to show you what she's looking at. Then I'll cut back to Anne. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my endpoint, and let's just take about 1 second and 15 frames of it, about 1.5 seconds. So watch this. I'm going to show you an easy way to do this. I'm going to click on the master time code there in the lower left-hand corner of the source monitor, and I'm going to type in +115. What that's going to do is that's going to move my playhead 1 second and 15 frames in a positive direction down this little timeline. That means 1 second and 15 frames to the right. Bam. So I know it didn't move much, but it did move at 1 second and 15 frames. I'm going to press O for my out point. So I've got an in and an out point. I've got a duration of 1 second and 16 frames because the frame that I was sitting on when I set that endpoint, it counts that one as well. I'm going to go to my timeline, and I'm going to set an endpoint in my timeline. I'm going to make sure that my source track indicator V1 is patched to my V1 timeline because that's the track that I want the video to land in. I'm going to make sure that my A1 source track indicator is patched to my A1 timeline because that's the track I want the audio in. And now, so I have a 3-point edit. I have an in point and out point on my source monitor, import my timeline. The next step I want to do to complete this edit is I want to determine whether I want to do an insert edit or an override edit. An insert edit, as you know, what it's going to do is it's going to take the frame at the endpoint in the source monitor and place it at the frame it's going to place it right where the endpoint is in the timeline. It's going to take all the rest of the frames behind it and it's going to drop it in behind the first frame. But it's going to take this point right here where I set the endpoint in the master, and it's going to cut it and it's going to push it back far enough so that I have enough room to fit all 1 second and 16 frames into the timeline. It's kind of like a line. It's kind of like if you're standing in line for the movies and somebody cuts in front of you, okay? Everybody behind the person who cut has to move back to make room for them. Same thing with these clips. Okay, so I'm patched properly. I've got my 3 marks, in point, out point in the source monitor, in point in the timeline. Let's do an insert edit. Okay, I can do an insert edit either by clicking the insert button here at the bottom of the source monitor, or I can go to the sequence menu and choose insert. Oh, I'm sorry, not the sequence menu. I'm sorry. I can go to the clip menu and choose insert, but bear in mind, I have to have the source monitor active. Think of it like this. The source clip is coming from the source monitor and going to the timeline, but where it's originating, the source monitor, that needs to be active, okay? And when it's in the source monitor, it's a source clip. Go to the clip menu and choose insert edit, or I could use a keyboard shortcut, comma. Notice that I have a different color clip there. It's that Caribbean, I believe, color that we associate with Roth. So even without looking at this clip, I can tell you I go from the master mango to the Caribbean color, which is Roth. I believe that's Caribbean, either Caribbean or cerulean. So let's take a look. I think it's cerulean, actually. So let's take a look.
Action.
Comes in. Look at our clips there. He looks at Roth. There he is. Bam. Okay. Let's take a look at that again. This time I'm going to make the screen really big. Okay. Comes in. Look screen left. What you see? Roth, gaze, object, reaction. What does she do? As a result of seeing Roth, she comes in. Okay. So that's how the gaze, object, reaction, syntax works. Now, there's something else you can do. You can also play with the performance of the characters as well. You always have to ask yourself exactly how does my character feel here, or how am I making my audience think my character feels. She comes in, she looks, she sees him. Her reaction is she drops her hands, takes a deep breath or sighs, and then walks in. Makes her look not very confident, doesn't it? Okay. If your director says, hey, I want Anne to look stronger in this scene, you could say, well, hey, what if I take out that hesitation that she has? Okay. And I have it so that when I go the gaze, the object, and when I cut back to her, she's already headed down the aisle towards the booth. You can do that very easily. We can trim this master shot 1, 2. I can trim this so that I skip the part where she kind of pauses and drops her hands, and I come in about like right here. Okay, maybe like right here. Okay, so say for example, I want to cut back to 1, 2 right about right here. There are lots of ways I can do this, the long way and the short way. The long way would be to use the blade tool, keyboard shortcut the razor tool. And I can match the blade tool so it snaps to where the playhead is in a timeline and click. You see I've made a through edit there. A through edit. A through edit is anytime you cut a clip in the timeline. You can see these double triangles that are facing each other like little bow ties. That indicates a through edit has been made. I'm going to switch to my selection tool, then select the portion that I don't want where she's, sighing and dropping her hands and all reluctant. I can select that, press delete, but look, I have a gap there now. I have a gap. I don't want that gap. So there are a couple of different ways I can get rid of that gap. I can select the gap and press delete. Okay. okay? Or I can place the playhead inside of the gap, go to the sequence menu, and go down to close gap. That's another way to do it, okay? That's the long way to do it, okay? Another way I can do this is this. I can cut out the pause is this. See, I want to cut to her coming in right there. What I can do is I can use something called the trim tool. First, let's drop a marker so I know how much I need to trim back, okay? I'm going to drop a marker not in the timeline up here. I want to select the master and drop a marker right there, okay? Because that's where I want to stop trimming. I'm using a special kind of trim called the ripple trim. The ripple trim, I can either press B, the keyboard shortcut for it, or the icon right here. That's the ripple trim icon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place the playhead at the head of the clip where I want to start trimming. I want to trim from the head of this clip in a positive direction. So what I want to do is I want to drag the head to the right, positive direction, all the way to the marker, bam. And what it's going to do is it's going to delete that first part, that hesitation, but it's also going to take away the gap too. It's gonna take away the gap. If I look at my 2-up here in my program monitor, what's to the left is the last frame of the outgoing shot. That's that shot of Roth. The last frame is right there. You can see that it gives you the time code, okay? And the first frame of the incoming shot, which is the 1-2 of Anne, that's what's on the right of the 2-up, okay? So this basically tells you after I release this mouse, because my mouse is still held down, that's going to tell you when I release the mouse, what's the last frame of the outgoing shot. That's the cerulean shot of Roth, 1E2, I think it is, yes. That's on the left. And what's the first frame of the incoming shot? So I can check to make sure I'm getting what I want. I'm going to release the mouse. Bam. There you go. Let's see what it looks like. Looks, object, reaction. She's a lot more confident there. So as you can see as an editor, you can affect performance. Let's compare the before and after, okay, with the pause versus the not pause. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. This is with the pause. Gaze, object. She looks a lot less confident, doesn't she? Okay. Let's look at what it's like when Anne comes in confidently. We did our ripple trim to trim off those frames from the head of that 1-2 master shot, the shot right here, when she comes in, so we don't see her sigh and drop her hands. A lot more confident, isn't she? Right? So that's how you can impact the performance of an actor. And that's a lot of, an editor does that kind of stuff a lot. Now, one thing that you need to know as an editor is not just how to operate the program, what buttons to push and what software to use. That's great. You can learn that pretty quickly. What's far more important is understanding the actor's craft. That means, how does the actor work? Many times, the actor will give you subtle nuances, a flicker of an eye, a slight smile, or a curl of a lip. And it could say volumes, especially if it's shot in close-up. These are not accidents. The actor is giving you every little nuance in their performance, most of which will be nonverbal. You have to understand what they're giving you and how it can contribute to the audience's understanding of the story. That is largely what an editor does. It's like they take the business, the facial expressions of the actors, the blocking of the actors, the dialogue of the actors, and they really use them like little building blocks to build meaning or to build a story. That's what an editor does. So I'm gonna do one more thing and I'm gonna end this tutorial. And that is something that we call editing on action. editing on action. Okay? Editing on action is basically, well, actually, I'm going to set up for editing on action. I'm going to let Ann get to right about here. Okay? And if I double click on this marker, it says, I want to cut to the over the shoulder from Roth, okay? Over the shoulder from Ann, I'm sorry, to Roth as her hand slides into the booth. I'll show you the shot in a second. The reason for that is I mentioned this earlier. If I hang on to 1, 2 for too much longer, I'm going to see that bounce board in the shot. I don't want that. So I need to cut away from it before then. And so I kind of use this marker right here to tell me, hey, I want to cut to another shot. I'm going to cut to a shot where I'm looking over Roth's shoulder at Ann's hand as it slides into the booth. Let's try 1C1. Nope, I can't use 1C1. Ann is already seated at the beginning of the shot. Let's try 1B4. Hey, it might work. There it is right there. You see Ann's hand slides in. Let's have her hand just off frame right here. Set an in point and set an out point. Let's go ahead and let her sit down. 1B4.
I need your help. I need to find someone.
Bam. Okay, let's stop it there. We may take more of that shot later on, but for now, I'm going to set an out point. By the way, if you set an in point and an out point in a clip and an in point in your timeline and edit it to the timeline, and you're like, uh-oh, I didn't get enough, that's okay. I can do that ripple trim that I did on the tail of the shot that I edited down to get more of it later on if I need to, okay? So what I'm going to do, I got my in point, out point in my source monitor. I'm going to set an in point in my timeline. And in this particular case, I'm going to do an overwrite edit. So instead of having this source clip cut in line as I edit it to the timeline, it's just going to lay on top of whatever's in the source monitor. I'm sorry, whatever's in the timeline. It's going to just lay it right on top. Keyboard shortcut for an overwrite edit is period, or I can click this button right here in the source monitor, or with the source monitor active, I can go to the clip menu and choose overwrite. I'll do that. Pow, just like that. And as you can see, it brought in 1B4 right there. Okay, just like that. Okay, so she comes in, she looks, she sees him, she comes in confidently. You see how we have something called contraction of time, where it took her a significantly longer amount of time to, in real life, walk down the aisle here, but I can make that time seem shorter because I just saw a few seconds of it, and then I cut to her hand. She's already at the booth. Her hand is sliding in the booth. As long as I show her hand just before it slides in the booth, I give the audience the impression, okay, yeah, she really did cover that distance. Normally, they don't do the math. I mean, you know, you can only use this to an extent. If she had to cover like a whole mile, you couldn't get away with this. But because of the fact that, you know, it's a shorter amount of space that I'm cutting out, I can contract time and make her get to the booth faster. Okay, so that speeds up how long it takes her to do something. Because there was really no new visual information if I were to show the entire walk. I'm just showing her walking. No new visual information there. I generally want to leave a shot once all of the visual information has been digested by the audience and there's no new information. I want to leave that shot and cut to something else, a new shot with some new visual information. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that edit on action I promised you. Okay. And the edit on action works like this. I'm going to show this sitting down action from two different angles. This is the over the shoulder from Ann to Roth. I'm sorry, over the shoulder from Roth to Ann, 1B1. I'm going to let her get about halfway through her sit, okay? And then I'm going to find the reverse of this. That means the over the shoulder from Ann to Roth of her sitting. Let's see, let's try 1E1. Right about here. Okay, I want to find exactly where she's like halfway into her seat here. Okay, so we're halfway into her sit down, like right there. That's pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna set an endpoint there. All right, and then I'm gonna go ahead and let her sit down in that one.
I need your help. I need to find someone.
Let him raise his head and set the out point. Okay, so this is the second half of the sit down,
I need your help.
and I end after Roth raises his
I
head.
need to find someone.
Okay, it's like that. Good. So I'm at the halfway in the sit here in the sequence window or in the timeline. I'm gonna set an endpoint there because I want to cut this clip in halfway into her seat when she gets seated from over Roth's shoulder. I've got my endpoint, outpoint, my source monitor, endpoint, my timeline, and I am going to go ahead and let's do an override. You definitely want to do an override edit here. I'll hit the period key, pow, there we go. All right, so let's see what that looks like.
Mr. Roth.
Well, let's start from here. It's usually a good idea to get good context. So you start from an earlier part of the scene.
Mr. Roth.
See that?
I need your help.
Okay, so let's see that one more time. The reason why I use this edit on action is that it draws attention away from the cut. That basically means that there's a cut in the shot, but you don't notice it because I take a single action and I show it from two different angles and the action is matched. So I start the action of sitting in the 1B4 shot and I end the action of sitting in the 1E1 shot, and it's like they're bridged. They're together and they're seamlessly edited so that I don't miss any of the action, but it's shown from two different angles. And when you do that, the audience doesn't even recognize that there's been a cut. Okay. So by the way, anytime you make a cut, and yes, you do have to make cuts. Anytime you make a cut, you're risking taking your audience out of a film. It's like hitting a speed bump when you're driving every time you make a cut. So in classical editing, that means editing where you're just basically telling a story. You generally try to hide your cuts. We call that invisible editing or classical editing. Invisible editing is a term I like to use where there are lots of tricks, J cuts, L cuts, edits on actions like we saw, edit on action like we just saw there. These are ways to hide your cuts. So let's take a look at that again.
I need your help. I need to find someone.
Okay, so that's my edit on action. And as you can see, I'm gradually replacing 1-2. Okay, what would have happened if I didn't edit on action? What would have happened if I just let her stay seated there?
I need to find someone.
Let's say I cut right here. I didn't edit on action. I just let her sit down in the 1B4 shot, the first shot. Let her get fully seated. Jump to my out point, set an endpoint there, my source monitor.
No.
I need to find someone.
Okay.
I need your help.
There we go.
I need to find someone.
Not interested. It's not something I do anymore.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let her get fully seated in 1B4, then I'm going to cut to 1E1. You're going to notice that the cut is a lot more obvious. It's like hitting a speed. Oh, there's a cut. That's what your audience is saying when they see the cut. Subconsciously, they're saying that, of course, but when they notice the cuts, you're pulling them out of the movie. Okay, so you want to hide your cuts as often as possible, and there are lots of tricks. So I'm going to have her get seated right here. Okay, set an endpoint in my source in my timeline, endpoint out point in my source monitor, endpoint in my timeline. I've got my 3-point edit, and let's go ahead and do another override edit, just like that. And I want you to watch this and notice how when she's seated, it doesn't look bad. It's not technically wrong. It just looks a lot more obvious to cut from when she gets seated to when I cut to the reverse where I see Anne's face saying, I need some help. I need you to find someone.
Mr. Roth.
Here it is. I'm gonna have her get seated fully.
I need your help.
See how that was a lot more obvious? I'll show it to you with the timeline active.
I need your help.
Okay, a lot more obvious. Okay, it's almost like you have a hiccup or something there. So let's once again see what it looks like when we do our edit on action. Oh, that's not it. Okay, I have to lay it back in. Once again, I'm gonna go halfway in to the sit down, set an endpoint in my timeline because that's where I want it to come in. Okay. Find the halfway point of her sit in the incoming shot. The incoming shot is the shot that's to the right. So in this case, 1B4 is the outgoing shot. 1E1 is the incoming shot. Okay. I'm gonna set an endpoint right about halfway into her sit. I already have an out point there. Endpoint, out point, my source monitor. Endpoint, my timeline. I'm gonna use an override edit. Pow, like that. And let's see if this edit on action works better. See that? Much smoother. Okay. By the way, if you wanted to kind of fidget with that, if you're like, well, that's not exactly halfway through her sit, or the two don't match up, there are a few things you could do. You can use the ripple trim to add frames to the head of a shot. This is way off, so you're going to see that's way off. Okay, that's way off. I added frames negatively to the shot, and I saw double action, which you don't want. Let's go in a positive direction with that ripple trim. And you're going to see this is too late. You're going to miss some information. See there? She's already seated. Okay? So the ripple trim can do that. And if you know, you can add and subtract frames from the head or the tail of the shot with the ripple tool. The roll tool, rolling edit tool, keyboard shortcut N, it's hiding underneath the ripple edit tool. So if you hold on the ripple edit tool, you can select the roll edit tool. What that does is that does like a double ripple. A ripple on the tail of the 1B4 shot, and at the same time a ripple at the head of the 1E1 shot. I can only go in one direction, so if I drag to the right, it's going to add frames to the tail of 1B4 and subtract frames from the head of 1E1. If I drag to the left or in a negative direction, it's going to subtract frames from the tail of 1B4 and add frames to the head of 1E1. Okay, so that's something else I can do. You can see my 2 up there. It's just like with the ripple trim tool. The 2 up to the left tells you the first frame. I'm sorry, the 2 up to the left tells you the last frame of the outgoing shot, 1B4 in this case. The 2 up to the right shows you the first frame of the incoming shot. So I can really just kind of match it up like this. Now, one thing is like say, for example, if I can't get it to exactly match like this, like I can't get Anne in both 2 ups at right about the same point in their seat, then that means I need to go back in with the ripple trim tool and trim one of these shots. In this case, it's probably going to be the outgoing shot 1B4. I need to ripple trim negatively on the tail of 1B4. So that means I need to use the ripple trim tool, keyboard shortcut B. Also notice the ripple trim tool is a yellow bracket with an arrow, okay? And I'm going to ripple trim it back so she's about halfway into her seat, like right there, okay? So I showed you how to use a roll and a ripple trim to perfect a edit on action here. Much better. See that? And it takes away your attention from the actual edit. Okay, that's all I have for you today. We kind of got you started on the edit. We explained to you a little bit more about how to label those bins and how to do override and insert edits. We talked about what the use of the master is. The master tells you where you are, for example, in the diner. We talked about gaze object reaction syntax. We talked about editing on action. Okay. And so these are techniques that you'll use a lot as an editor. And so we're going to continue on with editing this sequence as we move into the next tutorial. Thank you.